Mom smiled at the Thanksgiving table. Good thing your miscarriage spared our family from a failure, relatives laughed, and my sister, holding her child, smirked. Only real mothers belong here. I clenched my fists and stood up. No one knew this would be the last Thanksgiving. Cleveland winter mornings always begin quietly. From Catherine Martin's office window overlooking the snow-covered streets, she could see cars arriving one after another in the hospital parking lot. As a pediatrician with 10 years of experience, Catherine was accustomed to this morning routine. However, everything had felt different these past few months. She reached for the picture frame on her desk. A photo from her wedding day with James. Both of them smiling, full of hope. James, a successful corporate attorney, had always been her support. Especially since that day, Catherine unconsciously placed her hand on her abdomen. 5 months ago, they had lost their long-awaited baby. Sudden abdominal pain, followed by a long night at the hospital. Then the doctor's apologetic expression. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "The first patient is ready," the nurse announced. Catherine took a deep breath and regained her professional smile. This was her coping mechanism, immersing herself in work. Time for healing would come later. When James returned home, they would find comfort in each other's arms. The office phone rang. Catherine picked up the receiver. "Kathy, it's Mom." Catherine closed her eyes. Her mother Elizabeth's voice always evoked a little tension. "Good morning. Do you need something? I just wanted to confirm about Thanksgiving. I've invited James's mother too. Since it's the first time I'll be meeting her, I want everything to be perfect." In Cleveland's social circles, Elizabeth Anderson was a respected figure. As the owner of a high-end boutique chain, she always cared about appearances and reputation, and above all, she cherished the image of the perfect family. "You invited James's mother?" Catherine asked in surprise. "Yes, of course. She's part of our family. Especially after the recent event, she seems to be looking after you." The event. Her mother always referred to the miscarriage that way, as if it were an inconvenient accident, something that tarnished the family reputation. "Thank you. Eleanor is truly a wonderful person," Catherine answered honestly. James's mother, Eleanor Martin, was one of the most compassionate souls she had met after her miscarriage. As a local philanthropist, Eleanor was involved in many support activities for women and children. But more than that, she had offered Catherine unconditional love and support. Unlike Elizabeth, and Victoria and Tom are coming too. They're bringing little Timothy. Pride seeped into Elizabeth's voice. Catherine's sister Victoria led the perfect life. Having inherited Elizabeth's values, Victoria was a stay-at-home mom with a 3-year-old son, always playing the role of the ideal mother. "How's Dad?" Catherine asked about her father Thomas. The retired university professor often seemed hidden in the shadow of her mother's strong personality. He seemed to protect himself from family tensions by retreating into his research and books. "Your father is the same as always." Shut away in his study, not wanting to be disturbed by anyone, Elizabeth made no attempt to hide her irritation. After the conversation ended, Catherine gazed out the window. Thanksgiving. A time for family gatherings. She should have been 7 months pregnant by now. She should have been celebrating with her family, feeling the baby move inside her. She took out her cell phone and sent a message to James. "Mom invited Eleanor for Thanksgiving. Is that okay?" The reply came immediately. "Of course. We're a team. Let's get through this together." Catherine smiled. James was her rock. Through any storm, he stood by her side. And so did Eleanor. That evening, Catherine and James sat on the living room sofa, drinking wine and reflecting on the day. "I wonder why Mom suddenly invited Eleanor?" Catherine wondered. James shrugged. "My mother was pleased. She's wanted to meet your family for a long time. But Thanksgiving is." Catherine was choosing her words carefully. "Family gatherings can sometimes be tense, especially since Mom and Victoria don't have much understanding about our situation." James squeezed her hand. "It'll be fine. My mother is on our side too. Whatever happens, we'll support each other." Catherine leaned against him. While finding comfort in his words, anxiety remained deep in her heart. For years, she had endured subtle criticism and comparisons from her mother and sister. Criticism for prioritizing her medical career and not getting married at the right time. And now, after the miscarriage, How would they see her? The phone rang. It was Eleanor. How about lunch together tomorrow? I have some business near your hospital. Catherine smiled. Eleanor's timing was perfect, as if she always appeared when needed. Yes, I'd love to. The next day, at a small cafe in town, Eleanor greeted Catherine with a warm smile. An elegant yet down-to-earth woman, Eleanor's presence was always comforting. Thank you for the Thanksgiving invitation, Eleanor said. Your mother was very kind on the phone. Catherine laughed. That's Mom's social voice. She's desperate to maintain her reputation as the perfect hostess. Eleanor touched her hand. Are you okay? Thanksgiving can sometimes be emotional, especially this year. Catherine took a deep breath. To be honest, I'm a bit nervous. Mom and Victoria aren't very sympathetic about my miscarriage. For them, it seems like the result of my attachment to my career. Nonsense, Eleanor said firmly. You're a wonderful doctor, and someday you'll be a wonderful mother. Timing and method don't matter. What matters is love. At those words, tears welled in Catherine's eyes. These were the words she needed. Unconditional support. Deep understanding. On Thanksgiving Day, Catherine and James arrived at the Andersons' luxurious home. Opening the door, Elizabeth greeted them with perfect makeup and hair. Kathy, James, you're late, she said. Victoria was already playing with Timothy in the living room. She wore perfectly styled hair and an expensive cashmere sweater. Is Eleanor here yet? Catherine asked. Yes, she arrived on time, Elizabeth said with subtle sarcasm. As Catherine and James entered the living room, Eleanor stood up to warmly welcome them. She had apparently been playing on the floor with Timothy. Eleanor hugged them. You finally made it. Victoria picked up her son and smiled. It's been a while. You look good. Have you gained weight? The first subtle blow. Catherine maintained her smile and replied, Work has been busy. I haven't had time to exercise. Thomas emerged from his study and gently embraced his daughter. I'm glad you came. There was genuine warmth in his eyes. Beneath the surface of calm conversation and smiles, Catherine sensed cold glances from her mother and sister. These manifested as small sarcastic remarks, meaningful exchanges of glances, and subtle criticism of her profession. Everyone, dinner is ready, Elizabeth announced with a perfect hostess smile. As the family moved to the dining room, Catherine took a deep breath. It was going to be a long night. James squeezed her hand and whispered, We're in this together. Eleanor also sent her a reassuring smile. In the Anderson family dining room, a lavish Thanksgiving dinner was spread out. A crystal chandelier illuminated the table, and delicious aromas filled the room. Elizabeth began carving the turkey, and everyone offered words of praise. This year's turkey looks especially delicious, Eleanor said. She elegantly raised her wine glass. Thank you for the wonderful hospitality. Elizabeth smiled with satisfaction. Thank you. Our Thanksgiving traditions are most important to our family. Let's make a toast. Thomas raised his glass. To family and health, and to gathering together again next year. The sound of glasses clinking rang out, and a moment of harmonious atmosphere flowed. Catherine squeezed her husband's hand under the table. So far, so good. Catherine, give me your plate. Elizabeth offered a slice of turkey. As Catherine extended her plate, Elizabeth paused and looked her up and down. Have you gained weight recently? You're not pregnant anymore. You should be careful. A moment of silence fell over the table. James's hand tightened on Catherine's thigh. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. Elizabeth, Thomas said warningly. Elizabeth shrugged. What? It's a mother's duty to worry about her daughter. Catherine took a deep breath and smiled. Thank you. But I'm satisfied with my body. In the tense atmosphere, Victoria giggled while stroking her son's hair. Mom, don't say such things. But we mothers always have to think about our children. Those words were like salt in the wound. Catherine tried to continue eating in silence. Her hands trembled slightly. Timothy has already started preparing for kindergarten. Victoria changed the topic to her son. The teachers say he's extremely intelligent. He must take after Grandpa Thomas. Thomas smiled gently at his grandson. He's a wonderful child. Catherine, Elizabeth suddenly said. Are you and James trying to have another child? Catherine struggled to swallow the food in her mouth. Mom, that's a private matter between us two. Of course it is, but as family I worry. You're already 35. Time is ticking away. Eleanor quietly spoke up. Elizabeth, that's a bit, but Elizabeth waved her hand to silence her. As the mother of an only son, you might understand, but as the mother of 2 daughters, I wish for their happiness. Elizabeth took her wineglass and slowly swirled the wine. Actually, I've been thinking about your incident. Catherine froze. Incident? Your miscarriage, Elizabeth said frankly. As a doctor, you should have understood the risks. Long working hours, stress, and… She searched for words. Well, your age too. Catherine's voice trembled. Please, not now. But Elizabeth continued with a smile. In a way, your miscarriage might have been a blessing for the family. To be honest, Catherine, you've always been so focused on work I didn't think you were ready to be a mother. We've been spared having a defective addition to the family. Relatives around the table laughed awkwardly. Thomas covered his face with his hands, and Eleanor's face reddened with anger. Victoria hugged her son and smirked. I guess only real mothers belong here. Catherine's hands shook, gripping the cutlery tightly. The world seemed to spin slowly in her head. The life she had lost from her body, the countless nights she had cried, and now, even her identity as a mother was being denied. Slowly she rose from her chair. The room was suddenly filled with tension. Kathy. James quietly called her name. Catherine didn't move. She stared at her mother. The face of Elizabeth, aged but still beautiful. The woman she had admired, loved, and sometimes feared. James stood up and placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. His eyes were cold as he stared at his mother-in-law. Elizabeth, either you take back what you just said, or we're leaving. Elizabeth looked surprised. Well, James, I merely spoke the truth. As family, shouldn't we be honest? That's not honesty, it's cruelty. Eleanor also stood up. Her voice was quiet but filled with strong will. I didn't expect Thanksgiving in this house to be so cold. Victoria rolled her eyes. Please, everyone's overreacting. Mom is just concerned. Catherine finally spoke. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. For 2 years, James and I wanted a baby. The day I miscarried, I felt like I had failed. As a doctor, as a woman, and as a potential mother. But now I realize it wasn't me who failed, but you. You failed to show love and support. Elizabeth tried to speak, but Catherine raised her hand to stop her. The words you said across the table tonight weren't just opinions. They dismissed my pain, invalidated my experience, and worst of all, they insulted the life I lost. Tears welled in Catherine's eyes, but she stood strong. James and Eleanor supported her on either side. Mom, we're leaving. And tomorrow, please think about what you said tonight. I love you. But right now, I can't forgive you. She quietly placed her napkin on the table and left the dining room with James and Eleanor. Behind them, Elizabeth sat in shock. The morning after Thanksgiving, James's figure entering the Cleveland high-rise was clearly different from usual. His expression was etched with anger and determination. As he headed to his law firm's floor in the elevator, the events of last night wouldn't leave his mind. The pained expression on his wife's face, her mother's cruel words, and Elizabeth Anderson's cynical smile. Jim, I thought today was a holiday, his colleague Michael said with a surprised look. I have an urgent case, James answered concisely. Could you book a meeting room? And please call Karen from the tax department and David from corporate. Michael raised an eyebrow but nodded without questioning. Has something special happened? James exhaled deeply. Yes, it's related to how my wife was treated by her family at Thanksgiving yesterday. Are you going back to the Anderson Boutiques case? Michael's eyes widened. Yes, James replied calmly. I've kept my distance out of consideration for my mother-in-law. But now, it's time to apply the law fairly. In the meeting room, gathered before the lawyers, James calmly explained. Elizabeth Anderson's company, Anderson Boutiques, had long-standing legal concerns. Issues with employee working conditions, contracts with business partners, and tax processing irregularities. Until now, out of consideration for his mother-in-law, he had assigned this case to other colleagues. But from today, I will personally handle this case, he declared with a stern expression. I will thoroughly examine all evidence and take legal action if necessary. No personal feelings will be involved. We will proceed purely from a legal standpoint. At the same time, in another part of Cleveland, Eleanor was attending an emergency board meeting of the local women's support organization. Dressed in an elegant suit, Eleanor entered the meeting room with a face full of stern determination rather than her usual calm expression. "Thank you all for gathering today," she said to the seated board members. "I feel I must raise an important issue before our organization selects its next chairperson." The board members looked at Eleanor with curious eyes. She was one of the most respected figures in Cleveland's charity circles. Her words carried weight. "I am aware that Elizabeth is a candidate for the next chairperson," she continued matter-of-factly. "However, we need to carefully consider whether she truly aligns with our mission and values." Eleanor explained the events of last night's Thanksgiving in detail, controlling her emotions. Elizabeth's cruel words to a woman who had experienced a miscarriage, and the meaning behind those words. "Our organization's mission is to support and respect all women." Eleanor's voice was quiet but powerful. "I don't think it's appropriate for someone who insults women who have experienced miscarriage to be the representative of an organization that advocates for women's support." Meanwhile, Catherine was examining patients at the hospital as usual. However, her heart was not at peace. Last night, after returning home, she had finally released the emotions she had been holding for years. Crying in James's arms, she spoke about the verbal violence from her mother and her sister's betrayal. A nurse gave a small knock at her office. "Doctor, Catherine, your mother is on the phone." Catherine took a deep breath and picked up the receiver. "It's Mom." Elizabeth's voice sounded more anxious than usual. "I want to talk about last night." "I'm at work now," Catherine replied calmly. "And what you said isn't easily forgotten. You're being too sensitive." "I was simply—" Catherine interrupted her. "I'm at work. And honestly, I'm not ready to talk to you yet. Please give me time." She hung up and gazed out the window. For the first time, she felt the need to free herself from the toxicity of her mother and sister. Several weeks passed, and the situation rapidly developed. Elizabeth's company suddenly faced tax audits and workplace environment inspections. Though James appeared uninvolved on the surface, he was providing legal support to whistleblowers, arranging for the company's misconduct to come to light one after another. "This is a business matter," he explained to his wife. "If she broke the law, she should face it." At the same time, Elizabeth's position in social circles began to waver. The issue raised by Eleanor was seriously discussed within women's support organizations, and as a result, Elizabeth had to voluntarily withdraw from the next chairperson election. Furthermore, she was pressured to resign from other organizations where she served as a board member, citing personal circumstances. One night, as Catherine and James were enjoying dinner, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, Victoria stood there. Her eyes were red, and her makeup was smudged. "Please, hear me out," she pleaded. Catherine hesitated for a moment, but invited her sister in. In the living room, Victoria explained the situation through tears. Her husband's company had close ties with Elizabeth's boutique, and was also affected by the current investigation, and the family's reputation was rapidly declining in the community. "Mom cries every day," Victoria said. "She believes this is all your revenge. Kathy, please, stop this." Catherine calmly looked at her sister. "Victoria, this isn't revenge. These are consequences. Consequences of Mom's actions, and your words. But we're family." Victoria cried out. "Yes, family," Catherine said quietly. "On Thanksgiving night, you and Mom insulted the child I lost. And now, you're asking for help. Is that what family means?" Victoria fell silent. For the first time, an expression of understanding appeared on her face. Before Christmas, Elizabeth finally called Catherine directly. Her voice had lost its former strength and confidence. "Please, let's discuss how to resolve this situation," she begged. "I want the whole family to gather for Christmas." "I'm sorry, but I'll be spending this Christmas with my new family," Catherine replied calmly. "New family?" Elizabeth's voice trembled. "James and Eleanor, and the children from the orphanage Eleanor supports," Catherine explained. "We plan to distribute presents and have dinner together. This is the form of family I've been seeking. A place where people support and love each other." After hanging up, Catherine gazed at the snowy landscape outside the window. Her heart held both pain and a sense of liberation, and expectation for new possibilities. She and James had begun discussing the possibility of adoption. Eleanor had taught them about children who needed loving homes. Our family is determined by love, not blood ties, Catherine whispered quietly. In the season of melting snow, Ohio's spring arrived late. In the garden of Catherine's home, small buds began to emerge from the soil, announcing the beginning of new life. She stood by the living room window, holding a document in her hand. The review has been approved. She turned back and smiled at James. We're officially candidates for adoption. James embraced his wife. Wonderful. Let's open champagne. At that moment, Catherine's smartphone rang, and Victoria's name appeared on the screen. Catherine sighed. Since Christmas, she had minimized contact with her birth family. Just short conversations and superficial greetings. On the other end of the phone, her sister was crying. Please, help. Mom's company has filed for bankruptcy. And Tom's company has also taken a big hit. Her voice trembled. We might lose our home. Catherine gazed out the window. Her life had just begun to move forward. She and James were preparing to welcome twin girls, Lily and Rose, into their family. Was she really ready to reopen past wounds? I'll talk to James, she finally said. But I can't make any promises. After hanging up, Catherine explained the situation to James. He considered carefully and finally suggested consulting with Eleanor as well. The next day, Eleanor quietly listened while drinking coffee at Catherine's house. Whatever you decide, I support you, she finally said. But remember one thing. Forgiveness is not for the other person, but for yourself. On the weekend, an unfamiliar car stopped in front of Catherine and James's house. Elizabeth and Victoria got out. No longer with their confident appearance, both looked tired. Elizabeth's high-end brand clothes weren't worn as perfectly as before, and Victoria's face showed deep worry. Thank you for coming, Elizabeth said with a nervous smile. Catherine quietly welcomed the two. Please, come in. Eleanor was already seated in the living room. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment but sat down. Tension permeated the room. Something to drink? Catherine asked. No, thank you, Elizabeth answered in a small voice. She was clearly uncomfortable. I came to talk directly because you are our last hope. Catherine sat quietly, and James came to her side. Can you explain what you mean? Elizabeth and Victoria took turns explaining the situation. Anderson Boutiques had to pay a large fine as a result of the tax audit and had fallen into excessive debt. Victoria's husband Tom had also lost investments due to the company connection. And now, their foundation of life was about to James have funds, don't you? Could you lend us? The room fell silent. I want you to help, because we're family, Elizabeth finally said. You and James have funds, don't you? Could you lend us some? The room fell silent. Catherine stared at her mother and sister. The words from Thanksgiving night came to mind. Defective. Real mother. The people who had uttered such words were now asking for help. Why should I help? Catherine quietly asked. On Thanksgiving night, you mocked my pain. You called the child I lost defective. Why should I help such people? Victoria began to cry. I was wrong. That night, I said things I shouldn't have. But think about Timothy. He's still so young. Elizabeth also had tears in her eyes. Catherine, she struggled for words. I was wrong. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me? Catherine's voice rose slightly. Is that really what you think? Elizabeth took a deep breath and closed her eyes. I was jealous, she finally admitted. Jealous that you succeeded as a doctor, chose your own path, and lived ignoring my advice. That you refused to live like me. The room fell silent again. Catherine was surprised by her mother's confession. She had always thought her mother was disappointed in her. That she wasn't perfect like her mother. But in reality, her mother had been jealous of her independence. Catherine said in a calm voice. As you said, only real family belongs here. But real family isn't about blood relations, it's about relationships where people respect and support each other. She gave James a look. He stood up and brought documents from the study. What is this? Elizabeth asked, looking at the documents. This is a proposal to take over Elizabeth's company's debt, James explained as a lawyer. We will acquire and rebuild the company. Employee jobs will be maintained, and the brand name will continue. However, there are several conditions. Elizabeth and Victoria stared at the documents with expressions mixing hope and fear. What kind of conditions? Elizabeth asked in a hoarse voice. Catherine leaned forward. First, you and Victoria will volunteer at a support group for women struggling with miscarriage or infertility, at least 8 hours a week for 1 year. Volunteer? Victoria asked, with a confused expression. Yes. At the organization Eleanor runs, Catherine explained. There, you will listen to women who have experienced miscarriage or cannot have children, and learn how to support them. And second, James continued, officially apologize. To Catherine and to all women who have had similar experiences. Elizabeth clutched the documents. Her hands were trembling. She seemed to be struggling between pride and necessity. Give me time, she finally said. Until tomorrow, Catherine calmly replied. This is your last chance. Whether we can become a true family depends on you from now on. After Elizabeth and Victoria left, Catherine faced Eleanor and James. Did I do the right thing? She asked anxiously. Eleanor took her hand. People can change. But sometimes, forced learning is necessary. You gave them a chance to change. That's the greatest gift. That night, Catherine gazed at photos of the twins waiting for adoption, contemplating the future to come. A new form of family, not connected by blood, but bound by love, and the possibility of healing a wounded past and building new bonds. The next morning, her smartphone rang. It was a message from Elizabeth. I accept the conditions. And I sincerely apologize. Catherine took a deep breath. This wasn't an end, but a new beginning. A year later, Cleveland was again in the Thanksgiving season. Warm light illuminated Catherine and James's home, and the aroma of turkey and pumpkin pie wafted from the kitchen. In the living room, 7-year-old twin girls, Lily and Rose, were laughing while reading a picture book. It had been 6 months since they became a family. Everyone will be here soon, Catherine said, removing her apron. Is everything ready? James nodded while giving the turkey its final touches. Perfect. Eleanor said she'd come a bit early, so it should be any minute now. The doorbell rang, and the twin girls shouted Grandma as they rushed over. Opening the door, Eleanor stood with presents in both hands. My lovely granddaughters. She embraced the girls. Next to arrive were Elizabeth and Victoria, along with her son Timothy. Compared to a year ago, they had changed considerably. Elizabeth had a softer expression, and her former obsession with perfect appearances had receded. Victoria also carried a more gentle atmosphere. Kathy, Elizabeth said, a bit nervously, I brought this. What she offered was a homemade apple pie. The former Elizabeth would have brought a perfect dessert bought from a high-end shop. Thank you. Catherine smiled as she accepted it. Homemade? Elizabeth nodded, looking a bit embarrassed. I've been learning to cook with the women from the support group. They teach me many things. As everyone gathered at the dining table, a completely different atmosphere from last year spread. Instead of tension and sarcasm, there was a quiet warmth and air of reconciliation. During the prayer before the meal, Elizabeth began to speak through tears. What I've learned this past year is what family means. Not blood ties, but bonds where we respect each other and support one another during difficult times. She looked into Catherine's eyes. Catherine, James, and Eleanor, thank you for teaching me this important lesson. She continued further, and through spending time with women struggling with miscarriage and infertility, I've learned the power of words. Words can heal, but they can also deeply hurt. My words last year were unforgivable. Hugging her twin daughters, Catherine smiled and said, This is the true meaning of our last Thanksgiving, the end of hatred and prejudice, and the beginning of new understanding and love. After dinner, Catherine went into the garden with her mother. In the autumn twilight, the fall foliage glowed beautifully. How is Anderson Boutiques? Catherine asked. Elizabeth smiled. It's moving in a new direction. Now we have a concept of clothes for all women, creating clothes for diverse body types and needs. It's a small change, but a big step. And your activities at the Community Support Center? That became my salvation, Elizabeth answered honestly. By talking with women struggling with miscarriage and infertility, I confronted my own prejudices and learned true empathy. Now I'm also training in counseling 2 days a week. As the sun set, Catherine looked over her family. Eleanor was reading a book with the twin girls, and James and Victoria were discussing plans for the next holiday for the children. Father Thomas, with his peaceful retired expression, also joined the conversation. Her heart was fulfilled. This was the true image of family. Not perfection, but acceptance and understanding, not criticism, but support and love. And above all, the courage to embrace growth and change. Mom, thank you, Catherine said quietly, for changing. Elizabeth squeezed her daughter's hand and smiled with gratitude.